Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 69, brought to you by the one and only, the legendary Black Belt Magazine, as always. And once again, I know I say it every week. I'm going to say it again this week. I am extremely excited for another awesome guest on the show. This time we have Bailey Murphy, the champion of the recently published Black Belt Magazine World Sport Karate Rankings. He is the lightweight point fighting champion. Those rankings are based on the 2019 U.S. Open. That's where the champions came from. So Bailey won the lightweight grand there at that U.S. Open, which earned him that title, as well as all of the other champions that are listed there. And then a committee determined all of the other placements below that. In a previous episode of the podcast, we talk about the champions and the contenders and so on. So you guys can kind of dig back through the history and find that. Little bit of breaking news before we dive into the episode and the interview here with Bailey is that the first update of these rankings and potentially inclusion of new divisions is going to come after this year's U.S. Open. So this year's Battle of Atlanta is going to be very important for the rankings. This year's U.S. Open is obviously going to be important. That's where if you win the ISKA championship, we could see some changes in the champions, or we could see some champions defend their title based on how that U.S. Open goes. And then the contenders, Battle of Atlanta, will be taken into account. On the fighting side, things like Pro Point, Virtual Fight Tour, larger point fighting events aside from Battle of Atlanta U.S. Open that have happened previously will be taken into account. So there's kind of the little update for anybody that's wondering about where the rankings are going to be. And that's really what inspired us to do this particular episode, was that in the June-July issue, the current issue of Black Belt Magazine that's out right now, you can check that out at shop.blackbeltmag.com. We just published the first edition of the rankings that were made back in 2020, but it takes time to get things into print, and it is just in time for the NASCA season to come back in person in full force at the Battle of Atlanta, followed by the U.S. Open. So there's all that. I'm going to quit talking so much because we have Bailey Murphy on the show. Not only is he the defending Black Belt Magazine Rankings lightweight champion as the U.S. Open lightweight champion, he's also won on both of the major pay-per-view promotions for point fighting, both Virtual Fight Tour and Pro Point. He has won titles on both of those promotions, and he is the youngest fighter to ever win a diamond ring, which is, in my opinion, one of the most impressive things that he's done is to win a diamond ring as early as he has in his career. We're going to dive into some of those stories as we go. But Bailey, I'll shut up now. You tell us a little bit, introduce yourself some, and then also for our audience that maybe hasn't met you before, how did this whole martial arts journey get started for you?
So my name is actually Warren Bailey Murphy. I go by my middle name. Some of you may know if you follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is w.baileymurphy. My first name is Warren, but I do go by my middle name. A lot of people don't know that. It's kind of funny how I started martial arts. I remember being 5 years old, and I was always a kid that liked to be outside, like to play, do athletic stuff. So I remember being in the car one day, and my mom asked me, she said, "Bailey, do you want to play basketball or football?" And my response to her was, "I want to do karate." So that's kind of how that started. I didn't play another sport actually until my freshman year of high school. I had not done anything besides martial arts. So that's really that. And now I played football in high school. I was pretty good. And now I run track on Division II level. I was an All-American as a freshman and had a pretty good season this year. Ended up getting injured, hamstring injury. But besides that, that's really how it's been for me. I started martial arts at a very young age, and I'm still rolling.
That's awesome. And that track experience certainly is helping you with your endurance on the mat as well, because you seem to be one of those fighters that just never gets tired, which is, I think it was Richard Plowden that said on a recent episode that is a sin in point fighting if you ever get tired while you're fighting, right? Yeah, so that certainly helps out. So I want to talk about competition a bit and kind of how all that got started, because something that I feel like is interesting among so many competitors is the way that you discovered competition, because so many schools are either against it or just don't get into it. So what was that like for you? Did your original school support competition, and how did you find the tournament scene?
My original school actually did support competition. I wasn't on the national team or on a sponsored team actually until my freshman year of high school. That's when I joined straight up. So I was about 14 years old. So my original school, my instructor, he was actually a member straight up in around 2004. So his name is John Baxter Jr. So he was actually on the team. So I've always had kind of a good connection to Mr. G and the people over at Straight Up before before I joined them, obviously. And yeah, so there's times like when I was younger, I used to drive down to Rhode Island and train with them. So the tournament scene was always really around for me. My first competition was when I was 7 years old. Yeah,
That's
so
cool. That's
I've
awesome.
done that for a while. Yeah.
Mhm. No, it's always great to come from a school that supports
Yeah,
competition once you find
definitely.
your way into sport karate, because a lot of people, myself included, you find competition and you get into it, you find out that your school doesn't really support you doing it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, sometimes that leads to people having to cut ties with their original school, find new
Yeah.
places to train, which is what you never want to hear in martial arts, right? Because being in the martial arts is supposed to be about having that family environment and being able to kind of to get your squad that rolls with you no matter what. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Speaking of squad, we're going to get into some of your teammates coming up soon. But
Yeah.
so you talk about competing first when you were just 7. Were you always just a point fighter, or did you do some forms and weapons back in the day too?
No, I actually did all forms and weapons. The last time I did forms and weapons, I was actually I never did weapons. Actually, I take that back. I used to do forms up until I was 13 years old actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I did pretty well. I did gave back. I was in the traditional division. I actually 9 and under or 10 and 11, I believe. I think it was 9 and under. I won my forms division. I think was in the runoffs. It was myself, Jacob Penta. I think you might have been in the runoffs too. It was Ocean State 2010.
Yeah, that's crazy. Very cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I was pretty good at forms, but then as I started to get older, I just realized um how much I love fighting and that uh I needed to kind of separate to focus on one and truly become great at that.
Right. And that's something that I think is really interesting about modern sport karate is that a lot of times you hear people talk about there's so many more divisions today than there
Yeah.
were, back in the 90s or the 80s or whatever. But it's also interesting that competitors typically do less divisions, right?
Yeah.
Because back in the day, you would have a whole bunch of champions that would do forms, weapons, fighting. They would do it all, right? Obviously, the most notable of those that could win all 3 of them, your Kevin Thompson, Mike Bernardo. In the women's side, Casey Marks could win all of them, right? And so that's where you get some of those great legends that could win forms, weapons, and fighting. But today, even though there's so many divisions, you'd be hard pressed to find that ever. You know what I mean? The most recent person I can think of would be Ross Levine winning weapons and fighting, but he was never much of a forms guy, at least on stage and everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's interesting how with more divisions, we also got more specialization of the top athletes. And
Definitely.
so, as you said, you found point fighting and you knew that's what you loved. And at what point did you realize that you could be one of the best in the world as a point fighter? That it wasn't just something that you loved doing, but that it was something that you could actually be at the top of the game with?
Long Island Winter Open 2016. So that was actually my first event on straight up. And I was 14 years old, and my instructor, because he was a coach at the time on straight up, and Mr. G decided, yeah, let's just bump him up to the adult division. I was 14 years old, and I mean, I beat everybody pretty convincingly until I fought Cameron Dawson. By the time I think it was his first or second year on Paul Mitchell, and he was on a tear himself. So I felt after that tournament, I was like, I know I'm gonna be one of the greatest because just just how well I did as a 14-year-old, and I was confident. I didn't shy away from the competition. I embraced it, and I feel like I was just prepared. I feel like in juniors, my last 2 years of juniors, really, um, I really didn't have much competition. Tyreek himself, he went up early. Uh, Yakub wasn't competing as much, so those last 2 years for me in the junior division were I didn't have much competition. So fighting that one time in adult, kind of I knew I was gonna be great, and then I ended up winning later on that year. Was it Smack by the Canes, the
Yeah.
tournament by Canes? Yep. So yeah, that's really when I knew I could be great at this sport, and I kind of took it to another level from there. Let's see. Later that year, I fought at Kumite Classics. That's when I was able to fight Zol. Um, After fighting Zol, I also knew like I'm I'm good. Like I'm pretty good. That was actually 2017. I apologize. So the next year, but yeah, in 2017 when I fought Zol, my confidence continued to go up.
Mhm. What was it about that Zolt fight that told you that? Were you just with him the whole time? Did you beat him? What was it that you learned in that Zolt
So
fight?
it was a team fight. We were down pretty bad, but I fought really well, and I ended up closing the gap by a lot. And we ended up losing by 3 or 2 in the final score for team fighting, but I fought him very well. I ended up beating him in our individual match
Mhm.
by 3. So that was
That's impressive to beat Zolt by 3, because that was one thing about Zolt's game, is that even when he was losing, he always kept the fights close. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So to
definitely.
be able to stack up, a couple of clashes on him, if you will. You know what I mean? Like you have 2 possession lead in basketball, you can have a 2 or 3 clash lead in point fighting, right? So to be
Definitely.
able to do that is extremely impressive, and to do it at the age you did it at is
Yeah.
even more impressive.
For sure.
And we're going to talk some more about your accomplishments and kind of what all goes into that leading into the future as well, and what that means for your legacy coming up. But now that you've kind of given the part of your resume that tells our audience, like, hey, I'm one of the best, y'all need to look out.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what a day of training looks like for you. How do you prepare to compete at that level?
So a regular day of training for me would be, well, so I am a 2-sport athlete still, even though I'm point fighting at this high level. So while I'm in college, obviously I'll go through a day of classes. I'll have practice for track around 3:30. Um, then depending on if I'm going to Mr. G's or if I'm training locally with some people from Connecticut, um, I either drive down to Mr. G's, an hour and a half drive from my school, and I'll train with Brandon, Romani, and the other guys that straight up. And day of training is a lot more conditioning for me, even though I just had track, um, drills, and then we spar. And then the same thing goes for when I'm training with my people in Connecticut, with like Angel Diaz, Mark Glenn, and Mark G. So that's a basic day of training for me. Really, just track and sparring,
For sure.
drills, sparring rounds, everything.
Mhm. And so when you're training at Mr. G's, just to kind of give the audience a little glimpse behind the curtain there, how much of that is sparring rounds against other top fighters on Straight Up? You mentioned Brandon, Romani. How much of that is sparring rounds compared to doing drills? What's kind of the percentage breakdown there?
So it really depends on the day. There's times where we'll get there and he's like, "Put your gear on and start sparring," but there's also days where we get there and it's hell. Like we're doing a lot of conditioning, and then we'll spar towards the end for about 20 minutes. So it really depends on the day, and that's the same thing in Connecticut. There will be days where we're drilling hard, and there's other days where we're getting our rounds in. So.
Mhm. Very cool. And so obviously you're a fighter that's in top physical condition with the track and the drills and the sparring. So the physical side of your fighting game is always there. But one thing that makes me a fan of yours, and something that I've always seen on the forms and weapons side of things, is focusing on strategy, right? And in a lot of ways you do that through film study. And I've heard some pretty impressive stories from Mr. G, Joe Greenhall, for those of you watching, the coach of Team Straight Up. I've heard some pretty cool stories about how intense your film study actually is, and how
Yeah.
much you can recall. So we're going to play a little bit of a game with that here in just a moment. But first, tell us about the importance of film study. How important is it for you to watch old fighters that have retired and see what they do, as well as watching current fighters to understand their tendencies, what they do in certain situations? Just tell us what your approach is there and the importance of that.
Um, well, this is a sport, so it's important to be a fan of your sport, and I'm a fan of point fighting, a fan of sport martial arts. So it's very important to know history of our sport, to know the pioneers, and it's important to see what techniques worked then and what techniques don't work now, and why they work then and why they don't work now, and all the stuff that goes into it. Um, and it's just like a football team after a game, whether it's a win or a loss. The next day, they're going to be in their team room watching the film from the previous night. They're going to break down their film, what worked, what didn't work, and why it didn't work, right? So it's the same thing in point fighting. As soon as I finish my fight, I'm going back on my stream or going back on my phone if someone recorded it and breaking down the film. I'm not just watching it all the way through. I'm going exchange by exchange, watching different footwork, different things that happened during the fight, and why I was able to score or why I wasn't able to score. It's all things that uh, need to be looked at in order to get better. So.
Mhm. You said one thing really interesting there that I want to hit on just a little bit, and that is when you look at the older retired fighters, you look at some of the techniques they were throwing then that worked then, and then also look at why those techniques don't work now. Off the top of your head, can you give us an example of that? A technique, one way or the other, either that you noticed that they could hit then that doesn't score anymore, or maybe something that nobody's doing today, but they did back then that you think would still work. Do you have any examples of that?
Oh yeah, and I have it the other way too. Like, let's see. I know back then a lot more people kicked. Back then there was more axe kicks thrown, a lot more different kicks thrown. Today's sport, it's turning a lot into more of a hand game.
Right.
Like back then, nobody is gonna throw a defensive back fist for the most part. It's not really a technique that was used. That's kind of within the last 6-7 years that people are throwing defensive back fist. What else? It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird now, but it's becoming more. Fighters are getting smarter in the way they're throwing kicks. Then a lot of people are about 10 years ago. A lot of people weren't skipping up on their kicks purposely. I'll say that because people do skip up from bad technique, but a lot of people weren't skipping up on their kicks purposely. But now fighters are getting smarter and understanding their distance better to be able to throw those skip up kicks. They are effective. I know it's a kick that I like to throw a lot myself, a skip up side kick. I call it a Cali hop. But it's not a technique that would be. I know growing up for me, I was always told not to skip, and I still teach it that way. I have a good understanding of my distance and my fight. I have a good fight IQ and I understand when and when not to throw this skip up kick. And it's something that's thrown now that wasn't thrown as much in the past.
Right. You certainly have a high fight IQ. And for the audience watching, that skip up that he's talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bailey, but the reason that that's typically a bad technique if you don't throw it at the right time is that you'd be telegraphing your kick, right?
Exactly,
When your opponent sees that footwork, they're going to know that you're trying to throw the side kick or whatever, and so they're going to back away to adjust for that.
Yes,
and then I love what you said about the fadeaway back fist, because it also has one of those exceptions where back in the day, that was something that Terry Creamer made like a huge part of his game, was that fadeaway back fist. And really not many other fighters were doing it. So that might be something that in those last 7 or 8 years, like you mentioned, that's something that fighters noticed wasn't being used enough and started to use it more. So I could nerd out about that all day with you. But now let's get into this little game. So for the audience, I sent Bailey the question list and the topic list beforehand, but I did not tell him which specific fights that I'm about to ask him about. So Bailey has no idea what fights I'm about to say. I've got 5 of them, and according to what Joe Greenhall has told me before, if I tell him a year and a tournament, he can tell me who won the overall grand and sometimes even say like who it was against and the score and all that. So I'm not going to hold.
I'm gonna end up messing up now. Watch, but I'm ready.
All right, so I tried to make it so that they would start a little bit easier and get a little bit more difficult. So first one, let's go 2012 U.S. Open, men's fighting on stage.
I believe who are we saying, the winner?
The winner, yeah.
Okay, that was Ross Levine.
Close. Ross Levine was in the final. Who'd he fight?
No, was it Ross Levine versus was it against a Paul Mitchell guy?
He was a Paul Mitchell guy.
Alex Lane.
Alex Lane, very nice. Yeah, I knew that one was a little bit of a tricky one because it's a big tournament. But yeah, and that was Alex kind of, because back in the day, Alex got his nickname Fast Lane, and he was one of the top fighters in the world. But by 2012, he was in the latter part of his career. He still fights in the senior division sometimes in the 30 plus.
I got confused. I was thinking Ross and Jody were that final fight, but that was that wasn't the finals, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, the fact like 98% of all other sport karate fans would not remember the 2012 U.S. Open. Yeah. Alex beat Ross. So the fact that you got there is impressive. Yeah. All right, so next one. 2013, year later, U.S. Capitol Classics. Two fighters on the same team.
Oh, okay. That's when Ross beat Jody.
Close. It was Jody. So Johnny was on
Johnny,
stage. Johnny actually won. Who Johnny
beat Ross.
Close.
Or Johnny beat what's his name? Avery.
Avery. Johnny beat Avery. Exactly. So the Impex fighters were there. That was it. So yeah, Johnny beat Avery 5-3. That's a good one. Okay. So now this one, we're going to go back a little bit further. We're going to go back to 2006, but we're going to go Diamond. So Diamond Ring winner. Anybody can find this listed on the Diamond's website. So 2006 Diamond Nationals.
So Raymond Dames.
Raymond was around that time, and it wasn't one of the rings Ray got. In that era, if Ray wasn't winning the ring, who was?
So it was Trevor.
It was Trevor, right. So Trevor won that ring, and it was any guesses who he was against? It's a little bit of an obscure one, I have to say.
Nah, I don't know.
It was Donald Brady. So Trevor Nash beat Donald Brady in that one. Okay, so last two.
Doing bad today.
No, the fact that you're even getting close on some of these is insane, because this is, guys, for those of you watching that maybe aren't as familiar with sport karate, there's like 14, 15 major tournaments that happen a year between the leagues and everything. And then, you've got the lightweight, the heavyweight, the open weight. So like trying to remember even what fighters were close is ridiculous. So this is still extremely impressive, even though Bailey holds himself to a really high standard. So now I'll give you another hint on this one. So this is two Paul Mitchell fighters going against each other at the time. And now we're going back 20 years. So this is 2001 Charlie Lee Nationals. I thought this would be the hardest one, but it's two Paul Mitchell fighters against each other. Charlie Lee Nationals 2001.
This is Raymond versus Mike Pombero.
Exactly. And then who won?
Ray won.
It was a close fight, I think, but Mikey B won.
Mike beat him.
But again, like that was, guys, audience, that was 20 years ago, and he just pulled out that it was Mikey B and Ray. But anyway, so last one, I think that this one would be a little bit easier, because I'll preface it by saying that this is the fight that I watched at the New England Open in 2008 that made me a point fighting fan, because I traveled starting in 2006, and I was just a forms and weapons guy. Like I fought when I was an underbelt, but I never really cared for it. And then I watched this fight in 2008 at New England, and I was like, I love this. Like I'm going to watch point fighting all the time, right? And what makes it a little bit harder is that it's not the overall grand. It was the last fight of the team fights, and it was two of the top heavyweights at the time.
Yeah, I remember I was sitting right by the ring. That was Jason Grenier and Raymond Daniels when Jason he clutched up and won for a full circle. So that might have been, it might not have been the final then, because this would have been All-Stars against Paul Mitchell. Because it was Ray and Damon. That's who he fought. That was 2008?
Yeah. We might be off on the years there. But yeah, 2008 was All-Stars Paul Mitchell, and it was Damon against Ray, and Ray won. But I also remember what you're talking about with that full circle fight. Was that maybe 2009?
It may have been 2009, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so guys, the fact that Bailey was just able to get like as close as he did on all of those is insane. So props to you, respect for that. And then the number one thing, aside from being able to remember exactly who won, lost, stuff like that, really the whole purpose of film study is to learn about the techniques and the strategies that the fighters were using. And the fact that you do that to such a detailed and high level is something that I will always respect about your game. So yeah, admittedly, that was a very, very difficult thing to try to pull off live on a podcast here. Yeah. But I still think that you did an incredible job.
There would have been a little more thinking involved. I would have got it right.
For sure. So now we'll go ahead and move on. So we've been talking about some of these fighters from the past 20 years or so. If you look back, and you do look back, when you look back and watch the film, who are some of the fighters that you just wish you would have gotten a chance at in your prime? Not because like you don't like them and want to beat them, nothing like that, but just like you would have loved to test yourself against these 5 fighters or whatever.
So for me, Raymond, Ross, Hamed Ferruzzi.
Good one. So if
Dom
we stop, go ahead.
Dom Brady, some good lightweights, yeah. Let's see, one more. Joe Fife.
That's another good one.
Yeah,
so it's interesting. I feel like a lot of sport karate fans are obviously going to know Ray and Ross as soon as you say their names, right? Ahmed is somebody that I've always felt like has more of like a cult following in sport karate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you really know point fighting, there's guys that are Ahmed Farouzi fans, right? And I remember watching him at the Diamonds and winning super fights, I think, and all that. So when Ahmed was the third guy you thought of. So what is it about Ahmed that you would be interested in the most in a match against him?
He was a winner. If you watch any of his fights, he was very basic. He had great movement. He didn't do anything too spectacular, but he put it all together and during the fight and was able to win fights. And I like that because it would be a challenging fight because while he may not every exchange get a whole bunch of wows and stuff like that, he's gonna come clean and get his points to go back to the line. It'll be a great fight, I believe, because if I score, he's gonna make sure he get those points back because he's a competitor.
That's awesome. I love that. That's a great perspective. And now I want to add one more thing to that that's a little bit off script here, but I'm curious because I hear this debate all the time, right? The most common answers that I hear are fighters back in the day typically say Nasty Anderson's the GOAT. Fighters more from today typically say Ray's the GOAT. And then you get, here and there, you get people saying, maybe Pedro Xavier, Richard Plow, like you hear different names get thrown around as well. In your opinion, who's your GOAT? Out of all the film you've watched, who is the best point fighter you've ever watched?
Raymond James.
Mm-hmm. That's what I figured you would say. But I'm always interested to hear that. Any explanation behind it or just the numbers speak for themselves?
Yeah, I think the numbers definitely speak for himself. He has 10 Irish Opens, 7 diamond rings. That right there speaks for itself. We don't have to name another tournament, but it's just when he came on the scene, I remember watching a fight. It was Raymond Daniels versus Anthony Price. What tournament was it? I don't know. It was in 2004. It was either at Bluegrass Nationals or Ocean State, and I remember they called the fight speed versus experience. And it's just funny watching that because at that time, I feel like the game has changed so much. Back then, there was a lot more heavy hitting, cleaner technique probably during point fighting back then. And then Raymond came on, still having clean technique, but throwing these techniques at a faster speed, having different footwork than the rest of the guys that are point fighting. Mm-hmm. So I feel like he just kind of just began to evolutionize the game.
Right. I feel like both points that you made there are excellent, right? First off, Ray's speed was something that nobody had really seen before. Yeah. And then on top of that, you mentioned his footwork, the way that he would use the speed, the way that he would set his stance, even the way he would move his arms sometimes. Exactly. It was so unique, and that's what set him apart. The other thing that set Ray apart that most anybody's going to think of when they picture young Paul Mitchell uniform Raymond Daniels is his charisma, the way he carried himself around the ring, right? Exactly. And I think that in a lot of ways, I think that you don't go as over the top as Ray did at times, but I feel like a lot of ways you have that same swagger that Ray did. Definitely. And that's another one of those things that I love to see about you is you perform in your fight.
Yeah,
you agree with that?
I definitely agree with that. This is to my knowledge, so I hope no one gets mad, but the way I see it, especially through film and stuff like that, to me, it's like Ray was almost as if our sport's first star. So the way he was after fights, some people call it cocky, but I feel like he was an entertainer. He made fights entertaining whether you liked him or not. He entertained you, and I feel like in some ways I do that as well, where I'm very entertaining during fights.
Right. No, I agree that Ray is probably the first to embrace kind of the superstar mentality like that. You had performers back in the day too, like watching Nasty Anderson fight. Yeah. And of course, I've only seen film because he might have even been retired before I was alive. But, Nasty was somebody who it was fun to watch him fight if you go back and watch that film. But as far as embracing being a superstar, I feel like Ray was probably one of the first, if not the first, to truly do that. And so now, as we keep throwing around names, I want to play another game. And this is something, audience, if you like this kind of stuff, let me know down in the comments because I want to start doing this more. And so for this one, I just want to do a little bit of word association. So I'm just going to say a name, a short phrase, a word, whatever, and just give me the first few sentences that come to mind when I say that name. We're going to start off with a fun one. Joe Greenhall.
When Joe Greene calls my name, I think of family. He's someone that's always been there for me through martial arts and without martial arts. So I think of Mr. G as family.
Mm-hmm. I want you to expand on that just a little bit because when Mr. G was on the show, one thing that I wanted to dive into him with, and I want the audience to hear this again, is that he has a very gruff persona, right? Yeah. When a lot of people meet Mr. G for the first time and they haven't known him before, they might think that he's not very friendly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But as I know him and as you know him, I'm sure, it's that's not how he is on the inside, right? Yeah. So maybe tell us a little bit about what's behind that hardened exterior of Mr. G.
Yeah, Mr. G, he really is a loving, caring person. He's a teddy bear on the inside. Has a hard shell, I guess we could say. But yeah, I don't know. He's always been, even when I wasn't on the team, like I said, he's always been someone that was there for me. If my instructor wasn't at the ring, he would, no problem, coach me. He still does that to this day where if there's people, just random people at a tournament that he may not know, if they don't have a coach, he'll step behind and say a couple things because that's just the type of person he is.
Awesome. I love just the fact that you share that perspective because that's something I feel like more people need to know about Joe Greenhall. But anyway, back to word association. Next one, Brandon Ballou.
That's my brother, for real. Me and Brandon, especially during this winter break, things got a little tough once track started, but me and him were really, really on a grind. I was driving to him twice a week. He was coming here twice a week. So we were just going back and forth training. And then a lot of people know Brandon's a mechanic. So he's always there helping me out, looking at my car, making sure everything's okay. Because he's one of my great friends, and I consider him a brother.
That's awesome. Next one, Romani Alicia.
Same thing. Romani's one of my brothers as well. So it's actually funny. Before I was on the team, Romani and I competed against each other, and we used to have some heated fights. So it's just funny now being on the team. First time we hung out when my second tournament on Straight Up, we hit it off, and that became one of my good friends as well.
Yeah, what's crazy about Romani and Brandon is that I've competed against both of them before in weapons, which is wild. Like Brandon and I are the same age, and so this is the word that I'll use to describe both of them as far as point fighting goes is underrated. They're both like criminally underrated in terms of point fighting. Did you want to say something there?
I absolutely agree. They're crazily underrated. Even like, I'm not gonna get into it actually yet. Yeah, I'm not gonna.
I got you. But I would say underrated as far as weapons goes as well. Like Brandon, definitely. I competed against for the entirety of my junior career, and then we went to adults. He focused primarily just on fighting. But his bow form was a good bow form. It was a Joey Greenhall style bow form with like modern speed to it, which totally was changing the game. You know what I mean? And people didn't get to see it on stage really, but Brandon was somebody that I trained for, like Brandon made me train. A lot of people don't realize that. And Romani, I had to go against Romani for a Warrior Cup. Like Romani made it all the way up to the Warrior Cup round against me once. And, fortunately for me, I was able to come out on top. But it's like, he made it to a Warrior Cup final. You know what I mean? Like people forget that kind of thing, but I digress. Back to the game again. I'm not very good at this game because I like to talk too much. But anyway, another fighter, Tyreek Saint.
So that Tyreek is, again, one of my brothers, for real. The first time I'm going to tell a story about Tyreek. So what was it? It was actually my instructor's tournament. So Nutmeg State Nationals 2014. That was the first time I ever met Tyreek. We had a fight, not for the finals, but for third place. So that was the first time I ever fought him. I beat him. And after the fight, I was talking to him. I said, "Good fight." The first thing Tyreek ever said to me was, "I know I can beat you." That was the first thing he ever said to me. 2 weeks later, we went to a tournament in New York, and he beat me by 4. So ever since that day, Tyreek has really had my respect, and he's really made me work at a different level. Because I just remember being in that 12, 13, 14, 15 division, just working hard because I knew if Tyreek was at the tournament, I was gonna have a tough fight. I knew that I couldn't slack off because there's somebody in the state over from me working just as hard as me, that wants it just as bad as me, and wants to be just as great as me. So that really that competitiveness and that competitive nature of point fighting really what led to me and Tyreek being great friends. So.
I love that. And that friendly rivalry is so important in sport karate because we travel to all these events together. We're always competing against the people who are our age going for the same titles that we want. And so you've got to learn to be rivals with your friends. And that is something that's so unique about sport karate and so special. Anyway, next word. Battle of Atlanta.
Battle of Atlanta. It's always been a rough tournament for me, actually. Battle of Atlanta has always kind of been a rough tournament for me. The first time I went to battle was 2013. 2013 Battle of Atlanta. I lost to Jalen Carr when in the 12-13 division. So yeah, it's always been kind of rough. And then 2018 I lost to Zane. And luckily, I actually didn't go in 2019. I was in Italy. And then last year was a smaller event, not as many people, but I was able to win the lightweight division and the open weight along with the team fighting as well.
That's awesome. I remember Straight Up had a great turnout at last year's Battle of Atlanta, and I'm very excited for this upcoming Battle of Atlanta. One thing that a lot of the older sport karate fans in our audience will know is that Battle of Atlanta used to be like one of, if not the biggest fighting tournaments in America, right? Like everybody came to fight for the Battle of Atlanta.
Definitely.
So I think that we're going to see some big numbers, maybe even reminiscent of those old days as NASCA makes its comeback with this event. I want to talk about another event that's going to be coming up right around the corner. U.S. Open.
Great event. I love being able to fight on ESPN, being able to do what I love on television. So it kind of brings that pressure, and I perform very well under pressure. So I just love being at that event.
Solid. Next one. This is a fun one. 2-point body kicks.
It's terrible.
Go on.
It's terrible because, like I said, I can kick, but I tend to use my hands more. If I blitz somebody 4 times in a row, and the 5th time I go to blitz, they hit me with a little defensive side kick, a lazy defensive side kick. There's no reason why they should have half as many points as me when they didn't do anything. So I believe I don't know. I don't think kicks to the body should be 2 points, or if they are, that it should be kind of like a ruling. I don't know, because a lazy defensive side kick should not get 2 points. It's a lot of people don't even have their legs strained all the way, extended all the way. Not great kicks. So I don't know. I don't really like them. I don't know.
And that's my big pet peeve with defensive side kicks is that so often you see them called when the leg is not fully extended. And I'm like, if the leg's not extended, then it's not a kick. Like the whole purpose of a defensive side kick is to stop the opponent's momentum. So it doesn't matter if the foot hits their target area or not. If they're not stopping their momentum with a fully extended kick, that shouldn't be a scoring technique. And then I like what you say about, how quote unquote easy it is to just kind of lean back and get the kick out there. So that part of the argument would be that you need to reward more difficult techniques with 2 points instead of, a lot of people would argue that it's easier to land a defensive side kick than it is to land a reverse punch. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, I understand why they do it, because if they take away that 2-point kicks, a lot of people don't kick as much as it is. That could be it's very probable that a lot of people are just going to stop kicking completely, because at that point it just becomes unnecessary. But I don't know. I get it, but at the same time, it's I don't know.
I got you. Yeah. So one more for our word association game, and this one came up after you won on the virtual fight tour. Respect.
I respect. I don't know. For me, I feel like I am I'm very respected. A lot of people give me my credit. I don't know. I think it's just important because I do work. I've worked very hard. And a lot of time people kind of blow me off because I am young. But I've won some stuff at this young age. I'm 19. I had 2 overalls at 16 years old. A lot of people don't know because they thought I was 18 at that time. But in 2018, I was 16. I won New England Open in Ocean State at only 16 years old, and I was in about every final besides Quebec Open that year. So yeah, I think it's just important that I get my respect. Other young fighters get their respect. And stop blowing us off because we are right now we're the present. A lot of us are the present. We deserve that respect, and that's fine if you don't give it to me because it's all that's gonna do is fuel me and make me work harder. I'm not complaining at all. I'm just gonna have to make you give me my respect.
And that's one thing that I did like about that monologue that you gave famously after that virtual fight tour win is that, you know, some people might have taken it as like you just trying to lift yourself up and get your respect. But no. You were speaking on behalf of young fighters, young competitors in general that get overlooked because just because they're young, right? When really they should be respected for the talents and the accomplishments that they have at that young age. And
Definitely.
even further,
if you look at it, in 2019, in 2019 the finalists like for the overall, the people that were in the overall, there were people that were in my division. Like, let's see, so Mayor Kick, it was Tyreek and myself. Actually, I'll even go back further. So 2018, when I fought Blake at Capital Classics, it was Blake and myself. At US Open, it was Blake and myself. And then at Cap Classic, it was Tyreek and myself. 2019 Cap Classic is Tyreek and myself. Amerikick 2019, it was Tyreek and myself. So a lot of times it's people that I grew up fighting. It's the younger generation that were just in the junior division a couple years ago. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's why I go on about that. Because especially in the lightweight division, it is a lot of younger people. Enrique. These are all people that were in the junior division just a couple years ago.
Absolutely. And I think that we're going to have some strong lightweight contenders that are just about to move into the adult division as well. Right? You've got Alex Mancias, Tyson Ray, Darren Payne, Jason Latona. You've got a whole roster of even younger guys that are about to make their jump as well that will be contenders that will make for some really exciting fights. Speaking of exciting fights, with the upcoming tournaments, what would you say you're most excited about? Is it just being out there in big divisions again, or what is it that you're most looking forward to?
Oh yeah, it's definitely just being out there in big divisions. I think it's something that everyone really misses. I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to compete on the Virtual Fight Tour and Pro Point, so I've kind of had that. I've never lost that exposure really of having those big fights, fighting against those big time competitors. So it's just great to be able to go back out there and do it in tournament format. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that.
For sure. And now more specifically, what are some matchups that you're looking forward to? Is there anybody that you've been seeing on other Pro Porn or Virtual Fight Tour cards, or maybe at some Pro Mac events? Are there any matchups that you're like, I'd love to fight this guy or that guy?
Well, for me, I have to fight Jack. That's very important to me. Fighting Jack, fighting Elijah. Those are people right now to me. Like it's very important that I fight them, and not only fight them, that I win. Because like I said, I'm a competitor. Those are two people that have beaten me the last time we fought. So it's important to me and my legacy to be able to get those wins back. And that's really what I'm training for. I'm training hard, not just to beat them, to beat everybody, of course, but those are two people that when I wake up in the morning, when I go train, those are people that are on my mind.
Awesome. And I think that that is something that any sport karate fan watching this can agree with, is that we want those matchups. We want to see Bailey and Jack, and we want to see Bailey and Elijah, because, those are the premium matchups right now. Obviously, you and Jack have history on Virtual Fight Tour. I believe you and Elijah fought at Irish Open. Ultimately, Elijah and Jack were in that final, right? So there's a lot of history surrounding that, and I think that it's excellent matchups any way that you slice it. So I think any good sport karate fan definitely wants to see that matchup as well.
Yes,
So now we've been talking about young fighters and how they deserve more respect for their accomplishments, things of that nature. What would be your advice? Go even younger, maybe. Let's think like 15 and below, because like if we're thinking 16 and up, those are people that are going to be fighting you imminently, right?
Yeah.
But let's think like 15 and below, young fighters that are watching this podcast and they've been winning their division and they've got their sights set on, I want to be Bailey. I want to be the guy that comes up into or the girl that comes up into the adult division, wins right away. I want to be great like that. What's your best advice to those kids?
Become dedicated to your craft. Like I said, I watch a lot of film. I train very hard. You have to train as if you're the worst. Okay, you have to be hard on yourself. A lot of people don't say that, but be hard on yourself. It's gonna bring the best out of you, and embrace the competition around you, and do whatever it takes to win. Okay, so like I said, when be hard on yourself, I say that because me till this day, even if I win a fight, if I know I could have beat them, like if I could have beat them worse, yeah, I'm talking about great, like good fighters against good fighters. If I know I could have did something different during the fight to beat them, be more dominant during the fight, I'll say. I get upset with myself because I know I should have did that. I train very hard on specific things, so you have to be hard on yourself, because it's the only way you're gonna get the best out of you.
I love that. I think that's an excellent take-home message. Before we head out of here, Bailey, any other final thoughts or comments that you want to leave?
No, I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on all the recent accomplishments. We look forward, and I say we, the whole sport karate community and Black Belt Magazine, who will be at these events covering them, look forward to seeing you at Battle of Atlanta, U.S. Open, and trying to defend that champion spot in the lightweight rankings, and then maybe trying to steal another champion spot in the open weight as well. But anyway, so congratulations on all the recent success. I look forward to seeing you out there soon. And to our audience, thank you guys for tuning in. We always really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit that share button so that all your friends see it. And stay tuned. Next week, we have an extremely exciting episode, a legend of sport karate, actually, whose name was mentioned in this episode. That's all I'll say for now. But stay tuned, because we have an absolute legend coming up next week. This has been episode 69 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, and I'll see you next time.